maybe we'll go ahead and get started. It's just a couple of minutes after noon. So welcome everyone. My name is Lisa Edwards. I am very happy to welcome you to the Latinx Research Scholars Program final presentations. And this is our inaugural cohort of scholars. So we're very excited to share with you the work that they've been doing. First and foremost, we hope everyone's doing okay after the extreme storms last night. Again, thank you for taking the time to be here with us all. And this afternoon, we're going to be celebrating our scholars. We're going to tell you a little bit about the LRSP program and then allow them to tell you about their research projects. So again, my name is Lisa Edwards. I am a faculty member in the Department of Counselor Education and Counseling Psychology. I've been at Marquette, I believe I'm starting my 16th or 17th year. Do a lot of research about Latinx topics, particularly the mental health of Latinx mothers when they're pregnant and postpartum. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lucas Torres, to give a brief intro and say hello.
Hello, everyone. Lucas Torres. I'm in the faculty in the psychology department, and similar to what Dr. Edwards just mentioned, I also do research within Latinx mental health research topics, and so have been working with Dr. Edwards now for a few years on really getting programs like this up and going. And it has been a pleasure working with these young scholars over the past 6 or so months, and I'm going to stop talking so that you can get to know them a little bit as well. So thank you for supporting us and for being here.
Thanks, Lucas. As most of you probably can see, we are recording this session because we wanted to be able to access it later. There's quite a few administrators and faculty and staff at Marquette right now who have another commitment, so they can't be here, but we really want to welcome all of our community members and partners. Perhaps there's friends and family who are on this call to support the scholars, so thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to go ahead and start by talking a little bit about what's on your screen right now. Hopefully you can see it, an overview of the Latinx Research Scholars Program. And this was something that Lucas and I have been talking about trying to create for quite some time, and we're just thrilled that we were able to get it off the ground. What we thought about in this program was, how do we support undergraduates in getting really solid community engaged research experience? We know that undergraduates across the nation who engage in research during their time at a university end up gaining valuable skills for the future, and that it can be a really important retention tool as well. So we had always thought about, how can we kind of give this experience for scholars who are particularly interested in Latinx research topics, and then we wanted it to really be community engaged. We thought it would be very powerful to be able to do research that was within the Milwaukee community, that we knew would serve constituents within Milwaukee and would really provide an incredible learning experience both for the scholars, and then it would benefit community, and together the collaboration could be really strong. So we created this program. We were very fortunate to receive funding from the from Marquette University's Explorer Challenge, which you may have heard about here and there. They're able to provide some small funds to support innovative projects like this one. And so we were able to receive a grant to begin the program, which we started in January. And the program ran January, so the spring semester of 2021, all the way to today, August 2021. And throughout the past months, our scholars have worked with 2 different organizations. So a piece of this program was assigning, we have 4 scholars who you're going to hear from, and we're going to let them introduce themselves. But a key piece of this was assigning those 4 scholars to organizations within Milwaukee. And you're going to hear more about the organization, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Some of the staff and administrators and our colleagues are on the call as well. And so again, we welcome you and thank you so much for the support and mentorship you provided the colleagues. So scholars were working at these community organizations for about 8 hours a week on a project that was meaningful to that particular organization, some research project that was going to support the work that they already do and provide some helpful information and knowledge and research for the service provisions that they do. We also met as a group, our 4 scholars with Lucas Torres and Jacqueline, who is one of our grad students. We also met weekly to talk about not only the projects they were doing at these organizations, but we also talked about just professional development topics, getting ready for graduate school, applying to graduate school, what it's like to be a student of color within a graduate school context. And so we were doing a lot of professional development, and students then were also putting in their time with their community engaged research projects. I can speak for Lucas and I and say that it was a joy to work with these students. The one drawback was we were meeting virtually, and this is no one's fault except COVID. So we actually have not seen one another as a full group. I think I ran into Natalie near the Union one day, and I was so excited. There's a real person there. So, but it's amazing. We've been able to really connect, get to know one another, support one another. And this is a lifelong mentorship. And I hope our 4 scholars feel that we are with them forever now. We're going to watch them soar wherever they end up going after Marquette and in the future. So it's been a joy. On that note, I would like to turn it over to our scholars. So the plan is that we are going to let each of our 4 scholars share their research. They've created their own PowerPoint presentations, and they're going to share their research and the projects that they did with you all. We're going to give them about 10 minutes each, and we're going to try to keep on track. So we want to make sure to open it up to questions when everyone's done. It'll probably be easier if we just go through all 4, and then we'll open it up to questions. And so the scholars will tell you a little bit about who they are, what they got out of the program, and what they did. So I'll go ahead, Kat, if you could go to the next slide, and we'll start with Johnny.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm Johnny Irias-Puerto, and I'm no longer a senior at Marquette. I have graduated Marquette, so that's exciting. And I will be attending the University of Maryland College Park next semester. And I can honestly say that doing LSRP really helped me kind of guide my way in and out, having conversations with Dr. Edwards, having conversations with Dr. Torres about how to navigate the whole grad school admissions process. And so this is a great program. So I'll be talking today a little bit about emotional intelligence and coping with trauma. So title of the presentation is Coping with Trauma, Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children. So I work with UMOS as an organization, and I worked with the domestic violence, domestic abuse side of things. And something that I learned right away was that domestic violence is a cycle, and it affects both the children, the parents, and everyone who's involved. And it's not just the physical abuse that is being inflicted upon people. It's also the emotional and psychological abuse that is a factor because of the abuse. And so something that we learned a little bit, if you don't mind going to the previous slide, something that we learned is that domestic abuse because it is a cycle, those who witness it or those who experience it are more likely to be abusers themselves. Actually, it's about 10 times more likely that a child who witnessed domestic violence in their home growing up will be an abuser. And it's about 6 times as likely that a woman who either witnessed or experienced domestic abuse will be in a relationship where she will be abused herself. And so all of these statistics and seeing how all of this really led me into this project, into figuring out what can we do to stop this from spreading? How can we make sure that although terrible situations like abuse and violence happen at home, how do we make sure that children and the victims have the resources to be able to avoid that cycle and are able to break away from that. So moving forward, we can go ahead and take a look at a little bit of the literature. And so the first study found that there is a relationship between emotional intelligence, and what emotional intelligence is the ability to measure my state of being, for example, my state of being, someone else's state of being, and how our relationship relates to one another. And research has found that these relationships are broken amongst children early on. So for example, play is a big determinant as to what children see in the household. So for example, children who have witnessed their parents being hit, or they are hit themselves, are more likely to hit children at daycare, are more likely to hit children at school. And this all stems from what they're learning from home. Something else that also affects children is their ability to succeed in school. And so that's also something that's very important to look at, because not only are children repeating the same patterns, but also if they are not able to experience things like higher education, they're more likely to stay within that circle and not venture out. And so what happens is that there's no outlet to look at life at a different way other than the abuse that they've witnessed most of their life. And so if we move forward now, this is what UMOS is trying to do to prevent that. And so they have two programs, Mi Arcoiris and the ACT program. Mi Arcoiris is specially targeted towards children. And the big thing that I've learned while participating in this is that children have a big idea as to what's going on. And because they know what's going on, they're more likely to act out, and they're likely to just act in a way that they just know is acceptable. And sometimes that is not acceptable outside of their household. So things like kicking and screaming and just like disruptive behavior in the classrooms are all telltale signs that something might not be okay at home. And so what Mi Arcoiris aims to do is take those emotions and teach them how to deal with them. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. And this is how you deal with this. And so once we're able to explain to children that things are okay, it's okay for you to feel upset because you saw your parents in an argument, or you were able to witness it even if your parents don't think that you saw it. Like, those are all things that Mi Arcoiris aims to do, is to give that positive outlet for children to develop that sense of, it's okay for me to not be okay. And then for parents, on the parent side, the ACT program aims to show parents that they don't really know it all. And it's okay for them not to know how to be the best parent, as long as they're willing to learn. Also, we understand that because children can be hectic at times, especially like small, young children. If you've been in an environment where tensions are high, you may not be adequately equipped to deal with a temper tantrum in the middle of a store. And so you may lash out and you may spank the kid. And so we understand that all of these things affect the child, because they go, okay, now I understand that violence doesn't just happen between my parents, it happens between my parents and I. And it's acceptable for me to go ahead and act out in school when I don't get my way. And so the ACT program is really designed to teach parents different parenting skills as to how to cope with aggression, how to cope with stress and anger management, just so that both children and parents could go ahead and live as normal lives as they can after the occurrence of domestic violence. So the proposed study that I had for UMOS, if we move on, the hypotheses were that participants that attend more than 5 sessions will tend to score higher on emotional intelligence scores than participants who didn't. And I also was going to hypothesize that the emotional intelligence scores would be, for parents, would be lower than their child, and children would score higher than parents. And the reason why I started to formulate these hypotheses was because children are sponges and they pick up things very quickly. And so the more times they're able to express their feelings and move away from that cycle of trauma, the easier it might be for them to go ahead and have normal and stable relationships, while parents have the consequences of the abuser might keep coming into the parent's life and they might cause some regression. So that's where those hypotheses come in. So we can move forward as to what I was aiming to have participants. So UMOS mainly deals with women as parents, because research shows that women are more likely to be the victims of domestic abuse, and the children. So I was hoping to get about 120 participants, and the criteria was going to be that they were Latinx women and they were also victims of domestic violence. And the children were going to be their children with behavioral and academic challenges, so that we could see if there was any sort of improvement on school, very measurable things that we can go ahead and quantify. And so we can move on to what we were looking at. So the independent variable was the attendance. Were people actually attending to the sessions? And because like attending was the first half, can you actually learn something from the sessions? That's something that we were looking to see if people who attend the sessions are actually getting the results that we were hoping to see. And the other thing is, are you a parent or are you a child? That way we can measure which role you're playing into, and that helps us quantify things. And the dependent variable is emotional intelligence. How are you able to understand your own emotions, the emotions of other people, and how can you communicate between those emotions? So moving forward, so there was going to be an intake with informed consent. There's going to be an emotional intelligence questionnaire, which I think I have listed later on in the PowerPoint. And that was going to happen at the beginning of the session so that we could get a baseline for this is the score as soon as they get. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that scale entailed in a little bit. And then the emotional regulation training. So Miarcoides and the ACT program are both about 9 weeks, in which every week they focus on a different topic, whether it's discipline for parents or whether this is what anger looks like for children. So the emotional intelligence scale. This is the long law emotional intelligence scale in Spanish, because a lot of the parents that we saw were Spanish speakers. So it has the questions both in English and in Spanish, and these are rated on a scale from 1 to 7. 1 is disagree, and 7 is highly agree. And so each section here shows a different set of characteristics that we were looking at. For example, self-emotion appraisal, that's, do I understand my emotion? Understanding others' emotions. Do I understand why I feel the way that I feel? And do I understand what to do when I feel a certain way? So this was the criteria that we were going to be scoring participants on, in which if at the end of the 9 weeks, we saw that emotion regulation was higher, then the program was succeeding in teaching people about their emotions and about what to do with those emotions. So we can move forward. And so this is what I was hoping to see. That participants who attended 5 or more sessions had higher scores at the end of the 9 weeks. And that's because of the quality that was being taught at UMOS. I think that that's something that they were very strong in. The groups weren't necessarily high or a large number. And I think that had a lot to do with COVID, because you only have access to limited space if we were going to be in person. And it's a lot harder, as like us as college students know, it's a lot harder to pay attention to the virtual world, especially if you have real life going on around you and you're trying to take care of a family and you're also trying to deal with not falling into like abuse. Something that I also foresaw happening was that the role of parent or child really didn't affect. And I was hoping that as the study would continue in the future, we could get more on why this is, if children are actually affected less or more than parents, so that we could really start to figure out who we can start to talk to more, or what programs we should start investing more money into to try to help curb this issue. Moving forward, the strengths of and limitations of this proposed study, and it studies both parents and children. So it's not just what children are telling us, but we're able to see a holistic picture of what's going on. We're able to see what's going on in the home life, and we're able to see what's happening in school with our children no longer having that many like behavior issues at school, or are they improving in their academics. This was also really strong because it was able to take account for the Spanish speaking of parents. We didn't have to come up with a new scale that had to go through validity testing. So this was really good because we could go right off the ground. Some of the limitations were also that this was a 9-week program, and there's really no follow-up after those 9 weeks. So it's really hard to say if after those 9 weeks, do parents still succeed at maintaining those healthy relationships, or do they relapse back? We don't really know. So that's something that hopefully in the future we can continue to study. And then the other limitation is that there's no way to reinforce emotional intelligence training. So we can present the material online and virtually and say, hey, this is what you should be striving to work at as a parent. And to a child, we could be like, hey, every time you feel angry, you could go ahead and try to do this, but there's no actual way of making sure that that does happen in the real life. Moving forward. So what's next? We can go ahead and investigate the lives of students, their behavior or the academics, and see in a longitudinal study in the future, just taking into account the fact that like something that happens when you're maybe 5 or 6 years old might not have direct consequences until you're an adolescent, and seeing how those behaviors change. So that's something that I'm already thinking about. Like, this was what we can focus on for the future. And like long term, and this is the dream, is that we can learn how to prevent the cycle of abuse, and that we can be like, although this terrible thing happened to you, we can figure out how to stop that from continuing and stopping that from happening. And so, yeah, this is what I have been working at UMOS, and try to figure out how to move forward. And it's also what I'm hoping to carry on to the University of Maryland. I'm going into school counseling, just so that I can also take the foundations that I learned here at LSRP and continue that research in the future. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Johnny. Outstanding. We're so excited for you to start the next stage of your career, but thank you for your work at UMOS. We will turn it over to Nancy.
All right. Well, good job, Johnny. That was really good. And then, hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Jiménez, and today I'm here to share my portion of a bigger project that we called Telehealth and the COVID-19 Pandemic Impact on Latino Geriatric Memory Clinic Assessments. And we did it, we're in partnership with the United Community Center, the UCC here in Milwaukee. And when I say we, I mean me and Rosario. We worked on a bigger project, and we just kind of divvied it up into 2 sections. I take part more in the clinician portion, while she talks more on the caregivers. So just make sure to stay tuned for when she goes onto her portion. Before we get into the project, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. If there's one thing I've learned through working via teleconference platforms, it's that making a connection with people via the camera is still very important. So for starters, I'm a rising senior, and I'm majoring in psychology. And I like to say I'm dabbling in all the minors, because there's not one single minor I really wanted to stick with. So here and there, I have a class from each one. My research interests revolve around family systems and finding a way to fortify each member in the family, as to create a dynamic within each family unit to foster healthy relationships and mental health. Following undergrad, I plan to pursue a PhD in clinical psychology and working in a lab that focuses on families, minorities, and/or child development. In order to get the research I want to do, though, I have to first start growing as an upcoming researcher, hence participating in labs just like this one. So why apply to be a part of LRSP? Being a part of LRSP meant having a chance to get involved in a part of psychology that's often overlooked, such as research. And thanks to just the encouragement of a ton of professors, I thought, why not? Although it was still a little intimidating once reading through the requirements and just being a part of a lab. In joining LRSP, I made it my goal to increase my comfort and confidence in my research abilities and solidify my postgrad plans. I also learned that mentors aren't as scary as they seem. They actually are a very good set of helpful hands, regardless if they're professors in psych or even just part of our community partner organization. And lastly, why not apply? Even if I wasn't accepted into the lab, I wasn't going to stop looking for a lab to participate in anyway. Regardless, I would have learned any transferable skills that would help me in the long run. But what ultimately made LRSP so enticing was the ability to work with a community partner in the Latino community here in Milwaukee. Okay, so now let's move on to the research now that you got to know me a little bit. So our timeline went roughly like this. In the beginning, like Dr. Edwards and Torres mentioned, we were matched with a community partner here in Milwaukee, and we had to state what our research interests were. Of course, we had to remain flexible though, just because we stated what our research interests were, it didn't mean we were going to get placed somewhere that exactly fit that. That's a whole part of working with partners. You have to kind of work together in order to get to that common ground. Rosario and I were matched with the UCC, and that's where we started to plan our research, focusing on the Latino Geriatric Memory Clinic. Then from March to May, we met about once a week with our partners and put together a survey for the participants in order to help us better understand their roles and the impact that COVID had on the services of the clinic. Once we got to May, we finally got our IRB approval and began conducting our research. And as Kat previewed, we have to talk about our partners before we get into the actual research. So first off, shout out to the UCC, a multifaceted resource center facility for the surrounding Hispanic neighborhoods, facilitating enrichment programs for the whole community. We also have the Latino Geriatric Memory Clinic, which is also known as LGC, located in the UCC. It's devoted to the elderly within the community, offering many services to the members with physical impairments, Alzheimer's disease, and other forms of dementia. It provides a memory clinic where screenings and evaluations for memory loss are also conducted. And last but not least, we have our two awesome Shadi and Al. We have Shadi, who was the one who oversaw our project and guided us through the process. She was also our liaison between us and the UCC, while Al, the administrator, oversaw our project's initiation and checked in once in a while to offer assistance and just clarification when needed. So why choose the LGC Memory Clinic? Within the Latino community, sometimes behavioral changes in our older loved ones can be misinterpreted as a sign of old age rather than a symptom of cognitive impairment. Having access to that information is crucial to better the health of our loved ones. Additionally, there is a lack of trust sometimes between medical staff and older patients in the Latino community, leading to that lack of communication, which means that medical professionals and patients kind of have that barrier that may lead to an improper diagnosis. Also, due to the recent global pandemic, like many other organizations, the memory clinic was put on hold. The center decided to move its services to a mobile clinic, which helped bridge the distance between clinical staff services and caregivers and patients. Because of such changes, we wanted to see how the pandemic and switch to telehealth affected the attitudes of the community and clinical staff, what they hold towards telehealth services. As a result of this study, we proposed to evaluate the perspectives of clinical staff and caregivers partaking in telehealth. The goal was to evaluate an established program and see what the limitations and benefits were, thus having a potential to serve as a foundation for future policies and create a program to help guide others and their programs as well. So, first things that we had to do was define who these participants were, and is it going to be a whole group? Was it going to be smaller groups? So we decided to create two smaller groups. So we decided on focusing on clinical staff and caregivers, where caregivers consisted of adults, children, grandchildren, in-laws, and that estimated from a group from 20 years old all the way to 90 years old. So we had a very broad spectrum to look at. And it was based on, and that was all kind of estimated, just kind of based on the relationship the patients had to the caregivers, due to the fact that we wanted to make sure that all the information was kept anonymous, and we wanted to make sure to keep the identity of our participants safe. But like I said earlier, Rosario focused on the caregiver side. I looked more at the clinic staff. So clinic staff had to be a part of the team servicing patients and caregivers at the memory clinic pre and post the COVID protocol implementation. This population focused on just those focused on any part of the diagnosis process, whether it was first the intake and all the way out to even just recommending or references to other clinics afterwards. So we created 2 sets of interview questions designed to investigate each group's specific situations and experiences with telehealth. The interview consisted of open-ended questions to encourage conversation. One such question for clinicians was, what can be done to better support you in your role? And closed-ended questions that were measured on a 5-point Likert scale. 1 meaning you strongly agreed, 5 meaning you strongly disagreed. Asking questions like, am I confident with understanding how to help my patient via telehealth? And that was just to keep the interview not too long, but while still gathering the necessary information. Otherwise, because we are a Latino community, we love talking and it might take way too long. So we had to make sure not to dig up too much of people's time and still gather the information we needed. The project was a minimal risk to participants, with the only risk really being discomfort and additional stress, having to reflect on their experience and troubles they had to troubleshoot during the implementation of the telehealth protocol. Benefits, though, included identifying ways to improve telehealth services for future patients, caregivers, and staff using telehealth when necessary in the future. To create the survey, we looked at previous studies and anecdotes from those who have been using telehealth, and it allowed us to come up with the questions based on the personalized experience of each population. But something we also had to take into account was the fact that most of these studies and anecdotes were very much so based in heavily white-dominated communities. So we kind of had to put our spin on making it more of a Latino-oriented survey. Before conducting the actual interviews, though, we did have to conduct a couple mock interviews with friends, family, and other professional adults to better the delivery of the survey and make it more personable. Making the script and interview sound amicable was a significant step, as the Latino culture prides itself in being very warm and approachable. Being able to cater to that part of our identity allows for a more comfortable experience, thus allowing for better interviews and better responses as well. So we can move to the next slide. Sweet. All right, so what did we find? As previously mentioned, most of these closed-ended questions were logged on a 5-point Likert scale, and what we found with clinical staff was that scores on average tended to fall around the neutral range, which was a 2.59, meaning it was just most responses were just that, neutral. But when one came to look at the actual recorded data, one could see that there was actually a wide range of responses. For example, what one could notice is that the area of most concern was being able to read one's patient over telehealth platform. And when we mean read, we mean reading one's body language. It was closer to a 3.71. I'm sorry, these slides are mixed up in numbers, and I apologize. So that was more close to the disagree side because of the fact that one can't actually see one's whole body when the camera only focuses on this much. There are certain tests that have to be done in order to verify the diagnosis, and that includes some math questions, that includes just looking at their body language in general. And the whole point of the math questions is not to have a calculator on hand and not to have someone whispering the answers your way. If the clinician can only see this much of you, you can have a concerned grandchild over here, you could have a calculator down here, and then that can affect the diagnosis in the long run. So not a lot of people are very confident. Not all of the clinicians are very confident that they were getting a whole view of the patient in order to get a very good diagnosis. They were afraid that there might have been something left out or missing that could have helped better a sort of treatment plan in the long run for when they referred the patient to another clinic elsewhere. Otherwise, one of the most promising areas was their skills in order to navigate the telehealth platform. That was very comforting to hear, meaning that no matter how much exposure you had to a telehealth platform prior to the switch, the platform itself wasn't a problem when it came to administering the appointments and meeting with the patients. Most of those who we interviewed were able to very likely say that they were able to say confidently that the platform was something easy to navigate and something that didn't trouble them too much. And lastly, just some overarching themes we did find was that overall, the teams felt very well supported amongst each other. They felt like each person was listening well to the other, and they worked together well in order to create a program that was able to be implemented really quickly. There were bumps in the road. There were some things that they still wanted to change, but regardless on how quick the turnaround was, they were very proud of each other and felt like everyone had each other's back. Also, they felt that the services weren't that impacted in regards to the intake and flow of appointments they had. Some people did note that there were more ups and downs where there were times with a ton of appointments, other times with less appointments, but overall it was about the same as prior to COVID. So that was a positive, seeing that they were able to still have the amount of people that they were serving prior to, even during the pandemic. So overall, I found this experience 100% worth it. It was something I definitely wouldn't have had an opportunity to do if I had let myself kind of step back and still be afraid of research. But honestly, it was something I was lucky enough to be a part of the first cohort for. So I want to thank Dr. Edwards and Dr. Torres and Shadi and Al for this opportunity. And like I said earlier, if you stay tuned, Rosario will share the other half of our project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. We're so glad you took the leap and joined the program. It's been a pleasure to work with you. Great presentation. We're going to keep moving on. Natalie, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Natalie Leon, an incoming senior at Marquette. My major is psychology and minor in Spanish for the health professions. I joined the LRSP because this program represents who I am with my interest in counseling psychology and as a member of the Latinx community. The LRSP allowed me to begin research activities and help members of the Latino community within Milwaukee. I'm very grateful to have been given this opportunity to join the LRSP and receive mentorship from the faculty at Marquette and UMOS. I was able to get an incredible experience with research and working with the staff at both locations. So as a disclaimer, this presentation does contain the topic of human trafficking, which may make people feel uncomfortable, and if you want or feel the need to leave, please feel free to do so. Thank you. So throughout the last 7 months, I have worked closely with my community site UMOS. UMOS is the United Migrant Opportunity Services. The organization was formed in March of 1965 as a single focus, single state migrant and seasoned farm working serving agency only. However, today UMOS operates more than 40 programs with more than $25 million in grants and performance-based contracts. The department I worked with was the UMOS Latino Resource Center. The LRC provides services to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Throughout this experience, I worked directly with Javier Acevedo, the lead anti-trafficking outreach specialist and victim advocate, Mariana Rodriguez, the program director, and I received so much help from Alma Mercado and the other advocates at the LRC. Next slide. So together, members of the Latino Resource Center and I worked to create a research project both beneficial to the anti-trafficking team and myself. After careful considerations, including migration experiences and aftercare facilities, we focused on law enforcement. The title we developed was Identifying Reasons Why Victims of Human Trafficking Are Reluctant to Report Incidents of Trafficking to Law Enforcement. The research project is important to both UMOS and Milwaukee. For UMOS, this project can be used as a support model for advocates, victim advocacy, outreach programs, and further grants for research and writing. The project is important to Milwaukee because it provides information to law enforcement. The information from this project can contribute to training and increased collaboration between local law enforcement and advocacy centers similar to UMOS in Milwaukee. Next slide. So before beginning this project, it was critical that I complete a literature review. The first highlight is the number of human trafficking cases in the United States and Wisconsin. Upon researching this topic, it was evident that the numbers of cases were not accurate. According to the Law Enforcement Assessment of Sex Trafficking in Wisconsin, between the years of 2014 and 2017, 118 incidents of trafficking were entered into local law enforcement systems. Reasons for the underreported number of cases are due to misclassifications of official human trafficking cases, different data entering practices across the state, and survivors' reluctance towards law enforcement. The next highlight became current law enforcement training practices and programs. In addition to federal laws, every state has its statutes regarding human trafficking. However, a national survey conducted in 2017 indicated that only 19 states and DC statutorily mandate that law enforcement officers receive training on human trafficking. A mandated training program in Arizona encourages collaborative training with a human trafficking task force. This training allows law enforcement officers to ask questions and bring up concerns. Training and communication with the Human Trafficking Task Force provides support to local law enforcement in investigating and identifying human trafficking. The next highlight is the role that healthcare professionals have in identifying signs of human trafficking. According to research conducted in 2016, around 87% of sex trafficking survivors had some contact with a healthcare provider while being trafficked. With this being said, it is important for human trafficking protocols to be implemented in hospital settings as well. The collaboration with healthcare professionals, researchers, advocates, and law enforcement can promote human trafficking prevention at the community and societal levels. The last highlight is survivors' perceptions of justice. There was an extensive review done of federal cases conducted in 2008 that indicated that 77% of cases resulted in a guilty disposition and less than 1% resulted in acquittals. The sentences range from 50 years of incarceration to probation. The judicial system carries disadvantages for survivors pursuing a criminal conviction due to the burden of re-victimization. So for the project, the methods section, the project activities were to administer a quantitative research survey that measures survivors' perceptions from their encounters with law enforcement. The measures being used was a 12-question multiple choice yes or no survey. The surveys were sent via SurveyMonkey, where surveys completed the survey online. Participants for this research project had to meet the requirements of being at least 18 years old and a client of the Wisconsin Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Program at UMOS. It was also important that participants have been in the program between 30 to 60 days after the initial interview, otherwise known as phases T1 and T2. For the results, there was a total of 25 participants that submitted responses. This was a mix of both sex and largely labor trafficking survivors. So the next two slides display the questions and the frequencies at which participants indicated yes, no, or a skip. This first slide has questions 1 through 4 listed. And then the next slide has the remainder of the 12 questions. So the next slide, from the selection of data points, members of the LRC and I decided to focus on 3 highlight points. The first point measures survivors' trust in law enforcement. 60% of respondents indicated yes, they do trust law enforcement officials, whereas 40% indicated no. This was significant because this question measured survivors' attitudes towards local law enforcement in Milwaukee. The next highlighted point focused on survivors' willingness to contact law enforcement regarding reporting other incidents of crime. 44% of survivors indicated that yes, they would be hesitant to report a crime to law enforcement agency, whereas 56% indicated no. This highlight was important because it measured survivors' willingness to report other crimes and reach out to local law enforcement officials. The last important highlight was measuring if law enforcement officials utilize non-local law enforcement agencies like social service providers throughout the investigation. 52% of survivors indicated that law enforcement did not utilize non-law enforcement agencies, and 40% indicated yes. This highlight was important because it addresses the need for collaboration between law enforcement and advocacy agencies to ensure the best support for survivors. So the next slide. So throughout this section, I would like to discuss the major findings, limitations, future directions, and implications. So the purpose of this study was to identify potential reasons why survivors are reluctant to report incidents of trafficking to law enforcement. The findings indicate that law enforcement is fair and prevent crime in the community. However, they lack the ability to share information among the community. This action could create open communication and promote trust between members of the community and law enforcement. Although some survivors indicated that law enforcement did not take the report of the incident seriously, a larger group of survivors felt as though law enforcement provided comfort, reduced re-victimization, and promoted strong communication throughout the case investigation. So the limitations that occurred throughout this study may have been the limited sample size. The advocates from the Wisconsin Regional Anti-Trafficking Program determined that eligible participants would be individuals between that T1 and T2 phase to minimize the risk of re-victimization. Another limitation may have been the research survey being quantitative versus qualitative. This consideration was again determined to minimize the risk for the UMOS clients. Future directions. Going forward, there are possibilities to take this project in various directions. One direction is to determine specific areas in which law enforcement can improve, like in training or procedures handling victims of crime. Another possibility is researchers can use other methods to gain insight from survivors through interviews in order to directly help and be of aid to survivors in future occurrences. Next slide, please. So for UMOS, the implications from the results of this research project will be used as a support model for advocates and training, aid in applying for grants, help establish more outreach programs in the community, and support further research and writing in this field. Lastly, the goals of this project were to explore and identify reasons why victims are reluctant to report incidents of trafficking to law enforcement. From the results, survivors may lack trust in law enforcement, which might explain the reluctance to report. From this research project, it has also addressed the importance of collaboration between survivors, law enforcement, and advocacy agencies similar to UMOS, and how they can provide the best support and assistance to survivors in the future. And that is the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. As you can tell, all these projects have such important implications for the community, and we're so grateful for your work with UMOS. Thank you. All right, our final presentation is from Rosario, and we're getting really close to our end of time, but Rosario, take what you need, and then we'll see what we have left to wind things up. Thank you.
Okay, so hello, my name is Rosario, Rios, Cerda. This is part of my project, my half of the caregiver's perspective in the project. Like my partner said, this is a collaboration with the UCC Center, and we couldn't have done it without Al and Shadi. So a little bit about me. I am an incoming senior to Marquette. My major is psychology, and I have another major in Spanish for the health professions. My goals ultimately would be to move on to grad school and hopefully go into clinical psychology and do research and also get my PhD. The reason why I heard about LSRP was because I was speaking with Dr. Torres one day about wanting the experience of an internship of research. And he spoke with me about LSRP. And I applied, and I'm very thankful I did, because it has given me a lot of experience and skills that I once lacked before. So how everything started. So like Nancy said, we went into LSRP not knowing where we were going to go. We were given the choice to pick sites, and we did, and we ended up with UCC, which was a great opportunity. They told us that we would be working with the LGC, the geriatric center, and I've realized that it was a great collaboration to do between the LSRP and the site, just because it really went into depth about like the Latino side, how we were working with the Hispanic organization that was serving the neighborhoods around it. It really had bridged the idea of that Latino community and like mental health and ways to expand services to help them and bridge a relationship between them so that they feel more comfortable in utilizing services. And also it was important to do this project to help the patients that were now having to deal with the pandemic and having their mental screenings and everything undergo a change, and having to do a mobile clinic now, a telehealth platform, and having to know how to work around that. So first, we met our mentors at UCC, Al and Shadi. They gave us an introduction of what the organization was, what the center was, what the change was with the whole pandemic, and how were we going to go about everything. We planned everything out and scheduled everything. Then we went into more depth about the literature review. In my case, with the caregivers, most of the studies done and the research out there was limited to Latinos. So it was a lot of telehealth, but it wasn't with the Latino community. The few that were, that did go into detail about the community, showcased that there was barriers such as cultural factors, meaning most of the participants using telehealth viewed it as difficult because there was language barriers. There was unequipped staff to kind of translate things or explain to them the services they provided because of that cultural factor. And they also felt that they didn't have a relationship with the doctor, so they didn't feel that they trusted that service. And then after reading that, we went ahead and set up flyers, which Shadi helped send to all the patients that were receiving. They sent out flyers, and we went ahead and did the consent forms. And after that, we did our questionnaires. For the caregivers, it was more of a yes or no. Most of them were in Spanish. Actually, all of them were in Spanish, with the exception of 2 that were in English. But we had them in bilingual formats, so that was good. And we went ahead and gave them questions that just evaluated their experience. So it was if they had enough equipment, did they know how to navigate the platform? Did they feel like they could hear or had lagging or any issues such as that? And then at the end, we had an open-ended question where we welcomed them to give us any comments or suggestions that they would like to share, so that in the future they can put it into a plan where they can make those changes or continue those things that they liked in the program, in the platform. And then for the interviews, those were done by me and Nancy, and we went ahead and scheduled them. We gave them a first call. We wanted to just let them know what was happening and what we would welcome them for them to do in the interview. After that, if they would agree, we would ask if they could do it at the moment, and if not, we would just schedule an appointment for them, and we would give them a follow-up question for the interview. And of course, we would have to record their questions and everything, but because it was anonymous, we would just record their questions and have them as a number, since we didn't want to share any other information. We didn't want them to feel like it would affect their relationship with the center. And after that, we went ahead and did the results section. So background on the methods, we did reach out to a lot of the participants, but because it is summer and there was a lot of, it's summer and people are going around and doing their own things and also working, we could only get a hold of the 10 participants. Nevertheless, it gave us a lot of information about the platform that we didn't expect. Most of these participants were Hispanic background. They were between 20 to 90 years old. And in order for them to participate in this study, they would have to be any type of family member to the patient that was actively caring for the elder patient from the clinic. And they would also have to have received or had received telehealth services at the clinic in order to give us their input on their own experience. And then the overall caregiver results were the following. So their attitude toward the platform was that 87.8 was positive and 12.2 were negative, which is pretty good, if I would say so myself. And then for their opinion on whether they would like to continue in person or through the telehealth platform, most of them said that they would appreciate it if it would be a version of both of them. So some of them mentioned that if they could have the first appointment in person and then the following through the platform, that would be great, or work out certain appointments that could be in person and some through the platform. That's what they would prefer. Then the rest said that it was between in person and then telehealth. It seems to be that even though they were very happy with the platform and that they seem to have become adapted to this, they still preferred more towards the in-person or a version of both of them. And then in the open-ended question, some of the comments and suggestions they voiced was that they would like some security and privacy in conducting the diagnostic tests. So like I said, some of them preferred not to do the telehealth just because of that, because they still don't trust the process fully. Another person said that one of their something that they worry about is the medication for Alzheimer's patient, because of the money spent on it is quite high. So even though this was just her projecting one of her concerns with this program and maybe having more funding towards this. And then another person said that they really liked the platform. It had a great service. And someone else said that a possible idea would be to make an addition to some type of voicing or some type of technology in that way, where they could directly give a voice memo to the patient themselves, just because the caregivers do their best in translating and giving the information to the patient. But when they're older and they have hard of hearing, or they can't read as much because of the language barrier, or because they're just older and they can't read or something. So the caregiver said having that like bridge to be able to talk directly with the patient would be a much help, just because the caregivers don't feel as knowledgeable about the information that the clinic is giving. So overall, the trends that we saw in the entire study was that there were certain benefits, such as increased level of comfort and better accessibility. That being for the caregivers, most of them said that because of this new transition, they didn't have as much responsibilities to take care of at the same time. Meaning, if they had someone with memory loss or like Alzheimer that they had to take care of, and they also had a babysit at the same time, at least they weren't having to deal with the transportation from their home to the clinic. They could stay at home and deal with both responsibilities at the same time. And also, most of the caregivers said the patients, because of their age, just prefer to stay at home rather than going out as much. And some of the barriers, and this is more towards the clinician side, was that they weren't able, as Nancy said before, they weren't able to measure physical things that they needed to evaluate. And so one of these was home safety. I know that some clinicians shared that with us. In order to diagnose them and to evaluate how they're doing, they have to see how they react in their normal environment. So they have to see if they forget to leave the stove on, if they leave something like that. Those are all safety measures that they have to take into account. But because it's all went virtual, they're not able to see or have that on record for their diagnostics. And then also not having the proper software to support that transition. That also goes for the clinicians. A lot of them voiced that they would like to have an EHR, an electronic health records, just because it's easier to record patients' information and to communicate within each other in the clinic. And then some limitations for this study was that we lacked the adjustment towards the community participating. So that being said, that goes for the whole COVID thing. I think it was just harder for them to open up to us because we weren't familiar faces or names. They're close to Shadi and Al just because they're part of the clinic and they've seen them and they talked to them on the phone various times. But we were new researchers participating in this study. So they only knew our names, and we gave as much introduction as we could, but they couldn't put a name to the face, which was, I think, in the community is something very important. And for them to be more open about their answers, it could have helped a lot if it was in person. And then other than that, it would have been just time circumstances. like I said before, summer, there's a lot going on for a lot of people. So that could have been also, in addition, another reason why some of them didn't answer as much, or why we had more of a step back or obstacle to getting more interviews. Okay. And then overall, some concluding thoughts over the study is that it's working very well, at least in the caregivers' perspective, and even the clinicians, it's working very well. The way of navigating the teleplatform, the services, everything. It's just, it needs a little bit of change. It's a work in progress. It is new, of course, so we have to take that into consideration. But things that the primary thing is that it's a good platform, and it should continue to be, especially now that we still are continuing on with this pandemic. It's a necessity for everyone, and it's a solution to expand the services. But there's certain support, such as the EHR or new ways of doing diagnostic tests in order to evaluate certain measures like the home safety. So it would need more support in that sense. And yeah, so far that was my study, the study I participated in. My experience in LSRP has been, I think I would say, amazing, because it's helped me a lot to know what I want. I was very like wide what I wanted. I just said psychology one day, and I took the classes and I loved it. But now I know that, and I was so scared of research. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to do it. And I took a class of research and methods. But after having this opportunity, I learned that research isn't something as scary. And I very much like the fact that it allowed me to see the process of study and how the results can affect an organization or can help them, impact them. And it's allowed me to know that, like, I like the impact it has. I like that I can help them get the knowledge they need in order to have solutions for their issues that they have. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rosario. Thank you to all the scholars for all your great presentations. You all are amazing. And I know we're short on time, or actually we're over time, but if people have an opportunity to stay a little bit longer and have questions for our scholars, I'm sure that they're happy to answer any questions. But if you have to leave, completely understand. Thank you again for everyone who was able to take the time.
Oh, hello, Dr. Torres, Dr. Edwards, how are you? Just wanted to say quickly how impressive everything is. Great presentation. It's really good to know everything that's out there and what we can do. So the one question I had for someone in the crowd is, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job? Like, what do you love the most from what you have learned up to now?
Cool. So I can start. One thing so Rosario and I were also already able to do about 3 presentations prior to this one through the UCC. And something I shared in those, because they were a lot longer, so I was able to mention it in the presentation, was that working with our community partners, they help us really separate what the scholastic side of this all wants us to do versus what the real life portion of this all. So like in the classroom, they want the fancy words, the 7-page papers, the like everything up top notch to make sure it sounds like you are a professional, versus when it comes to actually working with the community, it was, you're talking to your next door neighbor. You're talking to somebody who, like, Spanish is their first language, English is their second language. You're talking with someone who doesn't want to hear from another doctor, another, hi, I'm the teacher sort of thing. They want person to person. So being able to just be reminded that, hey, you're not meant to make an elaborate, like, 7-page survey that makes people just like, be like, ooh, what's that word? It should be something they can read and like understand no matter what. And also just like putting the importance on asking also community, hey, do you like Latinx? Do you like Latino? Do you prefer Hispanic? Because that also can become very controversial. That was something brought just had it in my attention, especially when it came to actually just naming the project. Because at first we had it as Latinx, and it wasn't until Al and Shadi were able to be like, actually, our elders prefer Latino, so to make sure like everyone's comfortable, we're going to use Latino. So I think that was one of the most important takeaways from this.
That's awesome. And I'm sure, Nancy, that's also one way that you were able to connect even better in the community. You know, you're like, I'm one of you. Like, you know, you want to speak in Spanish, whatever you want. Like, I think that's going to make it so much more efficient. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah. Johnny, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and add. For me, it was just the ability to do something that I was actually very interested in. Because I feel like you'll join a lab and not really know what's going on. And like, yes, you still want to be a part of it, but it's not maybe what you are like really about. And then like having this opportunity to work hand in hand with an organization and say, yo, I'm really passionate about this. Like, this is really what I want to continue to research. And so like getting that opportunity to do that here, knowing that like my passion has always been to like work with schools and making sure that like students can get to like be their best selves, and like having that opportunity to also like already start to work on that, that was like just mind blowing, and just being like, wow, I really got that opportunity. And I don't think many people do, to, you know, continue to like open their horizons and just say, I'm doing work that one means something to me, and two is like going to set me up for success in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome that you know what you're passionate about. That's half the battle.
I just want to take a minute and commend our students in these presentations and thank the faculty and the community organizations who are supporting them. Your topics are so timely and so important, each of your distinct topics. And I know that it's so gratifying to learn how to do research and begin to contribute to the research base to solve issues and problems in our community, right? And so thank you, students, for your work, and faculty and community organizations for your support. What a great program and experience for our students. I really enjoyed your presentations.
Well, thank you, Lee and Joanna. Thank you for your comments and your questions. Are there any other thoughts or any other questions? If not, hey, I salute you all. These presentations were amazing. The amount of work that you all put into this, you know, the roller coaster ride that you all took with us throughout the last 6-7 months.
Wow.
You know, I'll speak for Dr. Edwards and say, just to see how much more confident and how much we could just see you all embodying young scholars really in this short amount of time. And so that makes us really proud, and we're really excited. Johnny, we're really excited for you out in Maryland. We're gonna miss you. Send us a postcard if they still have those. But thanks to everyone again, and we hope that you all have a great day and a great week. And thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you all. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adios, bye.
Adios.